It's been 75 years since the birth of modern China, and a lot's happened since then. From housing to healthcare, everything's improved, helping people live fuller, richer lives.
China has contributed to around 70% of global poverty reduction.
Building friendships around the world. That's China's idea of partnership.
Chinese leadership has been very important in bringing peace, security.
From made in China to innovated in China, Chinese tech now leads the way.
China has made wonderful progress in many areas of science and technology.
From a humble beginning to a global economic power, it's a rags to riches tale.
Yes, you can be profitable in China.
We did not observe any country to sustain such a high growth rate.
Ancient philosophy in modern practice. China shows us how we can live in harmony with nature.
When China talks about modernization, it's talking about a green future.
5 episodes, one incredible journey. Buckle up for the CGTN special series Journey to Modernization from September 30 to October 4, only on CGTN.
Hello and welcome to the CGTN special series Journey to Modernization. Over the past 75 years, China has experienced significant transition in its energy sector. With constant eco-environmental progress, the country is getting greener and cleaner. How has China achieved this? What's its global impact? And what are some of the challenges as China aims to achieve carbon neutrality in 2060? That's our topic. I'm Xu Qinduo. Joining me today for the discussion are Ye Qi, Chair Professor of Carbon Neutrality and Climate Change and Acting Dean of Society Hub at Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, Guangzhou; Dimitri de Boer, Regional Director for Asia and Chief Representative for China at Client Earth; Ma Jun, Director of Institute of Public and Environmental Affairs; Dr. Michelle Maiden, Head of China Energy Research at Oxford Institute for Energy Studies; and Laurie Milivata, co-founder and lead analyst at the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air. Welcome to the discussion. Environmental protection has been an integral part of China's development. Efforts over the past decades have changed the country. We are seeing a country getting greener and healthier. Visible changes are everywhere. Let's take a look. Professor Qi, I will start with you. If you look back over the past decade also, I think around 2015, I still remember the polling, for example, #1 concern of the Chinese people is pollution, water pollution, soil pollution, air pollution. But now, today, you are seeing, I would say, complete different country. So there are a lot of efforts. What's the most impressive probably part in your mind?
Well, certainly the most visible change is the air quality. And 10 years ago, well, actually 11 years ago, in January 2013, and the whole month, within the 31 days, there were 26 of days are heavily polluted. That's how bad it was 10 and 11 years ago. You're absolutely right. People then are complaining about the air quality. A lot of people actually decided to move out of the big cities. So in the last decade, we have seen the visible changes in air quality, in quality of water, and also in energy transition. This whole area of ecology and the environment actually has changed. I didn't really expect the things can change within 10 years. This is quite amazing. And looking back, I think this is in every major area related to the environment and ecology, even biodiversity, the desertification, and right now is so different. I was in Qinghai last month, and Qinghai appeared to be such a green place and also a major hub for green energy production. So I think this is it's quite amazing change.
Dimitri, you also live in China. Do you agree this is basically comprehensive change here?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been here for 22 years now in Beijing, and working with the Ministry of Environment and the Supreme Court and Supreme Procuratorate for the last 10 years. And it's phenomenal. The improvement in the air quality and the sense of safety around the environment has completely changed in this period. And I think that's a lot to do with revamping of environmental laws. China has special judges now and special prosecutors that work only on environmental issues, which is really making a big difference. 12 years ago, people said, "Oh, we got okay laws, but they're not really being implemented properly." That's not the case anymore. Nowadays in China, environmental laws are being implemented properly as a result of all of these efforts, and you can see the difference.
Yeah. Laurie, you were nodding your head. So 10 years, a big change. Many people, as Professor Qi mentioned, probably were pessimistic at that time. But now, look back, yes, there's a sea change there. Are you also surprised at the changes?
Certainly. So I was in China in 2012, 2013, when the air pollution peaked, and for the period after, and could certainly see it with my own eyes. Currently, I'm tracking it more from satellites and monitoring devices. So the average pollution levels, PM2.5 pollution levels in China have come down by 60–70% over a decade, which is a great accomplishment. And it's also required revamping, strengthening China's environmental governance in a massive way, as Dimitri alluded. So that's very important. I have to put in the reminder, though, that the levels that you're currently seeing in Eastern China are still hazardous to health. And I've seen this in other countries that I've lived, that as long as the air quality is improving, people will be happy, even if there is still air pollution that is harmful to health. But it's very important to keep that progress up and keep progressing towards levels that are actually as safe as possible for human health.
Well, Michelle, what do you see are the remaining challenges in terms of environment protection, in terms of improving the living environment for the people? What more need to be done, by the government, by the public, and also by all the participants?
I mean, I think certainly coal stands out as one of the key contributors to ongoing air pollution, but I mean, I think you do have to echo it. I was a student in Beijing 20 years ago. I remember the bikes, but I also remember the smell of coal. So I think the transformation to electric vehicles has been phenomenal and has really changed how people move around, how people think about the way they use energy. But I think there is a need for even more sort of societal impact, ongoing change, both in industry, and of course there's the other issue of big industries and duplication of industries across provinces that could really help China reduce and tackle its ongoing problems of air pollution, despite the amazing gains and improvements that have already been made.
Marjun, if you look at it in almost like a pattern for every country, first you have the pollution, industrialization, which basically begets the pollution, and then it's the efforts to improve, to deal with, to treat the pollution. I mean, China is the same, right? What's your observation?
I think we have all been observing what happened, not just in China, but globally. I think globally, the industrialization started, 100 years ago, and then urbanization. I think all of this have led to a massive increase of energy consumption and industrial production, and along with that, unfortunately, the enormous pollution discharge, which exposed the people, to health hazards and also have damaged the ecosystem. It started, in many other countries, but China, particularly during the past 40 years, have seen nearly a full cycle of that. We started this massive industrialization, urbanization. It 40 years have benefited, tremendously benefited China, but in the meantime, it also the enormous discharge also exposed our people to health hazards. I still remember in the early days, when I got what caught my attention, even before the air pollution, was the water pollution. At that time, the water pollution, water shortage, and destruction of the water ecosystem was also very, very serious. Through all this, years of efforts, I would say, not just on the air side, but on the water side, we have seen a significant improvement, and the worse than category 5 or good for no use category of water have dropped from 28% in 2006 to below 1% last year. I think that's the progress that we made, and this will have also a significant contribution to the protection of public health, and also of course the protection of our freshwater ecosystem.
Well, Dimitri, of course, if you look at the future policy, I think a couple of years ago in a big conference, the Chinese side mentioned about Chinese modernization or Chinese style modernization. One of the features is modernization of harmony between humanity and nature. Before that, actually, the Chinese side, had talked a lot about the lucid waters, green mountains as invaluable assets. So there's a change of attitudes, or awareness from the government to the public, basically. Everything. We need basically to do everything to improve the environment, to improve the situation, and also green is widely recognized as something we need to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I find amazing actually is that when China talks about modernization, it's talking about a green future. That's really interesting. When I grew up as a kid in Europe and we thought about modern, we thought about, a flashy car, we thought about nice, I don't know, fashion or other things, not about the environment, right? Whereas here in China, when you talk about modernization, you're imagining a future where you are living in harmony with the environment. That's amazing, right? And I think another thing that's really shifted in the last few years is where a few years ago, people thought very much about environmental efforts as something like a burden or something that, you need to choose between development or environmental protection. These days, that's not the case at all. Now with all of China's green sectors doing so well, those are actually the economy isn't doing great, right? But these sectors, wow, they're booming, right? So everybody now sees the green sectors as the most productive, the better economic opportunity, and they are in fact positioning China now in the world as potentially the most strategic country, with all of these strategic sectors that we know we're going to need in the next decades to come.
Well, Michelle, there's often facing this kind of dilemma. On one hand, you want to develop rapidly, at whatever cost. Sometimes it's really about the polluting of the environment. But at the same time, there's a requirement, there's a demand from your people, of expectation from the international community. You want to improve your environment. How do you balance development and environment protection here?
I think that answer, of course, differs quite dramatically between country based on resource endowment, based on political will. And we've seen China have this massive resource endowment of coal, and yet with quite a strong political will move away from it. I think also that equation that used to be, and that Professor Ye talked about earlier, that you had to industrialize and pollute first, or that there was a trade-off, and Dimitri talked about that trade-off between growth and environmental protection, that has changed dramatically with the availability of relatively low-cost clean tech. A lot of that, of course, thanks to China. But I think there are different development models that can be adopted in emerging economies. They take work, right? It's not just about having, as I was saying, the hardware. It's about developing the grids, developing the infrastructure, developing the systems, educating populations. That growth and development and modernization is about a green future just as much as it is about having a big shiny car. But today, that big shiny car can be electric, and it's not necessarily prohibitive like it was 10 years ago. So I think those dynamics have changed and that equation has changed. But I think we should continue to promote that understanding and that thinking about how development, modernization doesn't have to be polluting.
Mm-hmm. Well, Dimitri, with availability of these renewable energies, technologies, and products, is it getting easier to manage the balance between development and pollution here?
Yeah, I think it is. I'm actually very happy. I bought an electric scooter recently, and it's such a wonderful product. It's taking me around town, and I noticed in Beijing a lot of the electric mobility. It's an exciting new sector, but it means on the street that it's nice and quiet. Everybody's zooming around with the things that we want to buy on e-commerce platforms. But when I went to Bangkok or Jakarta recently, it blew me away. Just the level of noise on the street, the pollution. I couldn't have a conversation with people next to me because I was being, the noise on the street. So people look at these things, and it becomes very noticeable when you're there just how much better actually these products are. Coming back to China, modernization, that is what I would call modernization. Make it good, make it clean, make it work. A lot of Westerners also come to China now, and I love to take them into an electric Didi, and even my friends this morning, you won't believe it, took a robo-taxi down in
Wuhan.
No, in Beijing.
In Beijing.
In what's it called, Daxing, and what's it called, this whole area south of. You can now take a robo-taxi. It costs 9 RMB. No driver. It's all electric.
It's quite affordable.
It's amazing, right? Yeah. So that's modernization.
That's modernization.
Across China, electric cars, buses, and taxis populate the busy streets. In the first 6 months of 2024, more than 4.9 million new energy vehicles, or NEVs, were sold in China. By 2023, China's production and sale of NEVs accounted for over 60% of the global total, ranking first in the world for 9 consecutive years. China's shift towards clean and low-carbon energy consumption is accelerating. Over the past decade, coal consumption in China has decreased by 12.1%. By 2023, over 95% of coal-fired power units in China had achieved ultra-low emissions. Pollution by such stations has decreased by more than 90% in the past 10 years. As of June this year, the cumulative installed capacity of wind and solar power reached 1.18 billion kilowatts, a tenfold increase from 10 years ago, and historically surpassing that of coal-fired power. By the end of 2023, China had over 46,000 hydropower stations with an installed capacity of 380 million kilowatts, nearly double from 2013 and accounting for over 27% of the global hydropower installed capacity. Though it started relatively late, China is gaining momentum in its nuclear power development. In 2023, China's nuclear power generation capacity had reached 433.4 billion kilowatt hours, ranking second in the world. and by July 2024, China had 26 nuclear power units under construction, the most in the world. Together with other forms of energy such as biomass and natural gas, China's clean energy power generation had reached 3.8 trillion kilowatt hours by 2023, accounting for nearly 40% of all domestic power generation, an increase of about 15% from 10 years ago. In more than 80 national energy R&D centers and key national energy laboratories, Chinese green tech researchers are hard at work. In 2023, the number of patent applications for green and low-carbon inventions in China reached 101,000, a 20.1% increase over the year before, accounting for more than half of the global total.
Coming back earlier, Professor Qi, you mentioned about one of the key factors of China's, I would say, rather successful management or treatment of the environment is energy. Energy transition or progress toward probably renewable energy. Would you please talk more about that?
Well, China, when you're thinking about the energy consumption here in China, and we look at the overall energy endowment, the vast majority of energy here in China is coal. Basically, 90% of the overall energy. 97% the energy endowment comes from coal. And when it comes to petroleum or natural gas, very little, only a few percent. Mm-hmm. So historically, China has relied on coal for everything, burning for heating and for electricity, power generation, everything have to rely on coal. As a matter of fact, if you look at the first 20, 30 years after the economic reform and open up policy, coal consumption is very much related to this economic growth. Basically, you can say, historically, China's economic growth is basically fired, but based on coal. And in 1990s, when we're talking about this, 70%, 3/4 of energy comes from coal. But now, compared to then, we have a little more than half, 55%. So that's a major change. 20 percentage point already dropped. And for the last decade, we're talking about more than 10% percentage dropped with the share of coal. Coal is a major pollutant, makes a major pollutant for the air, and also for water, and everything has to do with coal. And coal produces the worst, greenhouse gases, the carbon dioxide. Primarily, most part of the greenhouse gases here in China comes from coal. So when the share of coal consumption has been decreasing over time and at a very, very rapid rate, and that just changed everything. It changed not only the composition of the overall energy structure, but also it changed the air quality, it changed the water quality, it changed our way toward the carbon neutrality and greenhouse gas peaking. So I think that this is the energy transition is a major success story when we look at it. And coal, or rather the reduction of coal consumption, the reduction of the coal share at the moment, and the relative amount. In looking ahead, and we will expect a decrease of the absolute amount of coal consumption in the next decade. So I think that I'm very optimistic at the moment that when you look at the coal consumption, because that not only have very relevant here for China, but also extremely relevant for overall globally when we want to address the climate change problem.
Laurie, there's a recent piece by Bloomberg. Basically, it said that as hydroelectric and solar power surging in China, they say the country may have already achieved this the goal of a peaking emission in 2030 by 2030. So 6 years ahead of that goal. I wonder, do you believe that's the case, or What's going on there?
I believe the Bloomberg report is based on my work, so I think it's sourced well, and of course it's the highest compliment that you attributed to someone else. So the result of my analysis is that if China maintains the current growth rate of clean energy, then China's emissions should have peaked, and that's now the really key question. China's going to announce new climate targets next year for 2030 and for 2035. And the important thing would be to update those targets to reflect the rapid growth in clean energy. So in fact, what happened is that a lot of the recent boom in clean energy has been driven by enthusiasm from China's provinces, local governments, state-owned enterprises, and it's happened faster than the central government was targeting. So now the question is, will the central government targets be updated to reflect that progress and bring forward the target for emissions peaking? If that happens, that would of course be a crucial contribution to the global effort to mitigate climate change.
Dimitri, the Chinese, if you look at the green development, for example, renewable technology, renewable energies, for example, in particular, how important are they in the Chinese energy mix to power the economy?
Well, absolutely. And I think basically China is blowing itself away with the speed at which it's growing now. 2 years ago, it was unthinkable that we would have the level of solar PV manufacturing and wind manufacturing and battery production that we have today. 5 years ago, even more unthinkable, right? So why is the target for 2030 of installation of renewable energy achieved now? And that target, mind you, was set like 3 years ago, right? So basically, China is completely blowing away its own expectations for how fast this can go. So you have to imagine that for the whole society and for the whole energy transition and what that means. What does it mean for other sectors? What does it mean for what are the remaining bottlenecks in terms of actually absorbing all of that capacity into the grid, really making use of it? What does it mean for setting new targets to the international community? Everybody's adjusting their calculations constantly. And who knows, maybe next year, we will see other technological breakthroughs in battery technology, for example, that could really unlock the full scale of this. Because, with renewables, the variable output is what's the struggle, right? You want to be able to have power all day long and all night long and in the winter, right? And how do you secure that from the renewable sources? The more storage you can do, the cheaper you can do storage, the better, right? And so that's where the big sort of technological challenges right now. And I'm pretty confident that the Chinese government and business sector are doing everything they can to try and get a lead in that extremely strategic space right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's also, if you look at it as industries, there's competition, obviously. For example, EVs, solar panels, etc. Now we're facing this, some people would call that politicization of this green products. EV is one of them in particular, like overcapacity. The US has been accusing China of basically overproducing or overcapacity in terms of the EV production. How do we look at that issue? On the one hand, you do see there's a demand. We would love to see more use of EVs around the world to fight climate change. On the other hand, business point of view, the US is competing with China, saying, oh, there's overcapacity. We need like a more than 100% tariff on any possible import of the Chinese EVs.
Well, I mean, it's pretty simple, right? The world has set a target of tripling renewable energy capacity by 2030, right? And that means that the world needs to achieve 11,000 gigawatts compared to something 3,000 and something that we are now, right? So that means 7,000, 8,000 in the next 7 years. That's about 1,000 gigawatts a year. Currently, China's capacity of producing solar PV and wind is approaching that level. So I would say we have a situation where we can supply the world with what it needs to achieve the global target that has been set. I don't see an overcapacity problem. I see a great surprise for everybody, that we can actually do this now. And it's cheap enough, right? And it's large enough. The scale is there to do it.
So, Michelle, in terms of the so-called overcapacity issue, is really about how to deal with that in terms of different markets, in terms of sharing the technology, sharing probably the profits. During the whole process, of course, we are getting better against climate change.
Absolutely. I think there are trade-offs, and we're starting to talk about them more, especially obviously in the West. There is capacity in China, there's a huge amount of know-how, but increasingly in Europe as well as in the US, we used to talk about the trilemma, right? The energy trilemma about security, availability, affordability. Now what's coming into the mix also is industrial competitiveness. And we can't have it all, as was just said. I mean, if we want a rapid and low-cost energy transition, we should use Chinese technology that's available. But for a lot of governments now, it's also a question about maintaining certain industries and certain parts of their economy. And so there will inevitably be trade-offs. How do we manage them and how do we coordinate and collaborate, I think, is what we need to be thinking about more. There's also, I think, a misconception or misunderstandings in the West where if we impose duties or tariffs on Chinese goods, then that will help create these sectors in the West. And I think that's not true. I think that underestimates the amount of innovation, the amount of technology, the sort of all of that ecosystem that happens in China that has allowed the scale up. It's not just government support. Yes, there has been some government support, but there are lots of other factors that feed into this. Without understanding those and without some of the learning, the technology transfers that could happen from China to the West, we won't be able to recreate those industries in the West. So just keeping China out is not good enough. Collaborating is really what we need to do. Unfortunately, we're in a world that feels sort of quite low on collaboration and high on competition. Hopefully, we will be able to change that through greater communication.
We need more collaboration. And let's turn to Laurie. Earlier you mentioned about updating, Chinese side updating its goals or its policies to achieve the ultimate goal, carbon neutrality in 2060. What's ahead? What do you think the Chinese side need to do probably, or what are the possible challenges along the way to achieve that goal?
The long-term goal that China has is very good and very strong. It's, however, important to just make clear that China will address all greenhouse gases as a part of that target, not only carbon dioxide, which the current targets cover, but also methane and other strong greenhouse gases. The biggest question, though, is what kind of a path will China follow to that 2060 target? To meet the goals of the Paris Agreement, it's really important to start reducing emissions as soon as possible and to achieve substantial reductions already over the next decade. If China followed a pathway that keeps emissions increasing until just before 2030, then peaks and then reduces very slowly, then that would make it really impossible for the goals of the Paris Agreement to be met, because what matters for the climate is how much is the total emissions over time, the total cumulative emissions. So specifying this pathway and setting targets for 2035 that are aligned with the current progress that's happening. China's CO2 emissions and coal consumption started falling this year, and the growth in wind and solar and other clean energy started accelerating last year to way beyond the levels before that. So capitalizing on that progress and setting targets that already deliver significant emission reductions over the next decade is really the key.
Professor Qi, If you look at the energy sector, of course, on one hand, we want to reduce the use of coal. On the other hand, we want to increase the percentage of the renewable energy. What are the challenges in that path?
The only problem with the solar and wind is this intermittency. This is during the day, it's okay, we get the solar energy, but during the night, and we need to have a energy storage.
Yes.
As Dimitri just talked about.
It's a technology issue.
It's a technological issue for this storing that electricity. It is also a technology issue for the overall power grid. And we have perhaps the largest power grid in the entire world. We have state grid, we have a southern grid, and these companies, they do have the capacity to deal with this intermittency problem. And they have great engineers, and they certainly have the capital to do a good job. And they also need to have more willingness to overcome this. This is not a problem. And now, if you look at the major economies in the world, be it China, the US, the Europe, UK, and it has been a steady decline of the carbon content in the overall energy sector. So that the decarbonization is the overall trend for all major economies. So this is the technology has a major contribution to that. And now we actually seeing this is the greatest hope in the entire history for this cleaner energy, the substitution of the dirty energy. So this is really the best time. I think we also have this consensus now. Now it's not a technological problem. It's more of the geopolitical and geoeconomic issues. And that's something we do need to collaborate among different countries. We also need to have collaboration between different sectors. The market, the NGO sector and the government will all get together to build consensus. To see this, the picture is very clear. The picture is very clear. And whether or not we're willing to pay for the cost for the future.
Okay, it's a political will, sort of.
Exactly.
Marjin, earlier you mentioned about actually this new energy industrial chain in China. In mid-August this year, so China's National Development and Reform Commission, very powerful ministry, people would say, in charge of the Chinese economy, announced that the country has built the world's largest and the most complete new energy industrial chain. You also talked about this, carbon intensive industries, the challenges remaining in those industries. Put that inside, take that all into consideration. What can we do? What kind of government, like NGO like yours, and also the industries? Is there a consensus? Do we have a clear path forward? What do we need to do?
Yeah, I think there's an increasing consensus built that we need to create a synergy between climate mitigation and pollution control and expansion of green and high quality growth. I think that has been made a national policy in China, and but to achieve that, we need the stakeholders to all join these efforts and to try to achieve that, we need to tap into the successful experience that we had, in addressing the pollution control, in 1 decade of time, such a kind of a significant reduction of our pollution. I think it's based on massive monitoring, started from there, and then help to facilitate a multi-stakeholder action plan. And on the climate side, we believe that we also need climate data infrastructure to be built. Not just national data, but really down to the provinces and cities and not just regional data, but sectoral data, and drill it down, not just to the sectors and conglomerates, but hopefully, drill it down to the facilities and assets. And then based on this data, we can do, create all this assessment, performance assessment, and then the result can be used to facilitate, more science-based decision making for green supply chain, finance, and green consumption.
Let's turn to our audience to see if there are any questions or comments on our discussion. Yeah, please, the young lady in the first row. Yeah.
I have a question to Mr. Laurie. My question is, what do you think of China's policy progress in energy transition? And in what area do you think China could further promote? Thank you.
Thank you so much. The policies that China has used to promote clean energy are very strong and impressive, and something that I'm recommending to a lot of other governments to take a closer look at. So both the policy that has enabled the rollout of distributed solar energy called whole county solar, and the clean energy bases that are vast designated areas for building wind and solar. Those policies could unlock a lot of clean energy development in other countries as well. The area where, even if you look at just China's current policy documents issued in the past couple of months, I think the policymakers themselves recognize they have a lot of work still to do, is controlling carbon emissions and starting to actually bring them down using all of this clean energy. So just in the past few months, there has been an unprecedented number of policy documents from the State Council, even from the Central Committee of the Communist Party, looking at this. So that's the area where China has work to do to start stably and reliably bringing emissions down.
Mm-hmm. Any more questions? Yeah.
My question today is regarding to the balance of economic development and our responsibility of ecological protection. Is it possible to keep this balance, and what sort of strategies can be implemented? Thank you.
Professor Qi, you want to take this question?
Well, as we discussed earlier, with the help of this clean technology, you can actually have a win-win situation between the economic growth and the environment and the ecology and the biodiversity. This is the same time, I think what is more important, we need to change our way of imagining the future. Earlier, Dimitri talked about modernization. Our perception of modernization in the past is very different than the modernization that we now can imagine, right? The President Xi made it very clear. Now we have a Chinese way of modernization. In that modernization, this harmony between man and nature is a critical component. And there is a possibility, and when we imagine our future, especially for you, the younger generation, you can see this better because you will live, then you have a huge responsibility to make that imagination come true.
Well, with that, we are coming to the end of today's discussion. Many thanks to our panel of distinguished guests and also audience for joining us for this discussion of the CGTN special series, Journey to Modernization. I'm Xu Qinduo. See you next time.